Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to this episode of the Coal Seam. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be your host over the next 28 minutes or so. Joining me in the studio today is Mr. Jason Bostic, Senior Vice President of the West Virginia Coal Association, and we're here to talk a little bit about coal and energy. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we've had you on here. Appreciate you coming by to talk about our favorite topic, coal and energy, and a little bit about what's going on regionally and around the state, and maybe some of the international developments related to coal and energy as well. Well, here we are early, November. It's 30 degrees outside, and I guess global warming's behind us, so probably a good place to start. Give us a little update, if you will, on some of the statistics that we're putting together and compiling, production trends, employment levels, things like that.
Okay. Well, Chris, as you know, as we headed into the winter season this year, we found ourselves, not only in this country, but around the world, in a very precarious position as it regards energy. There were shortages across the board for every conceivable form of energy, whether it was domestic, household electricity production sources, or industrial energy, or fuel for the coke ovens, for the blast furnaces that make steel. So we had a very, very nervous, if you will, summer, as you know, as we watched coal stockpile levels at electric power plants in this country and even in this state drop to the lowest levels they've ever been since records were kept, going all the way back, I think, to 1968. And there was a combination of factors that kind of overwhelmed everyone. The economy recovered a lot quicker than anybody expected. There were some supply disruptions on the natural gas side of the world. And of course, the supply chain disruptions for energy generally, whether it was coal or natural gas or anything, as it rippled through the greater supply chain to the railroads, the barge lines that move the coal, or even to the equipment suppliers that get us the material that we need to facilitate coal production. So the dramatic uptick in energy demand caught everybody by surprise, caught the domestic energy producers with very low stockpile levels. And when energy demand skyrocketed, what little bit of stockpiles that were available of coal were burned through fairly quickly. At the same time, or about the same time, concurrent with that, there was the disruption, the geopolitical disruption in Europe. And as we've talked on the show before, Ukraine and Russia in particular was a huge energy supplier to Europe in both coal and natural gas and just about every other energy form that you can think of. But in coal specifically, Russia was Europe's biggest coal supplier, about 45 million tons, 40 million tons thermal, 5 million tons metallurgical.
Let me stop you there, because just maybe embellish or not embellish, but just to really talk about the shortages that are going on. I was on a panel talking earlier this week, and it occurred to me as I was looking over some of the information prior to that we have a couple things going on here that are kind of clashing. In some ways, we have a perfect storm working against the industry with all the disruption, the equipment shortages, the supply chain, the rail service. There's a lot of those issues that are creating tremendous pressure on the supply side and getting the commodity, out of the mine. And if we have it coming out of the mine, then we're having difficulty getting it to end users. Mm-hmm. On the other side, there's a, perfect storm kind of working for us. There's a world shortage of coal. There's the entire world is looking to replenish stocks that are dangerously low levels, and we have a great export opportunity as well as a domestic opportunity. Mm-hmm. To rebuild, replenish our stocks at an inventory at our coal-based manufacturing facilities or power facilities.
Yep.
So you have both those things that we're trying to juggle and work through at the current time. But there is a shortage of coal that we're experiencing because of all the pressures and difficulties that's been placed on the supply side. But we're getting, it's almost like we're trying to transition, away from coal to these renewable energy forms, and we're at real dangerous levels of coal that's available for consumption today.
Yeah, Chris, it really is. We've said perfect storm, but when you think about it, it's almost like a tsunami. We've had the supply chain disruptions was one issue. The enormous demand domestically was another issue. Then you layer on top of that the international demand. And at the same time, you've got policy decisions that were made at the national level through the regulatory agencies, the alphabet soup of EPAs and OSMs and everybody else that were made starting, let's say, in 2015. And the damage that was done to the domestic coal industry, and we can use West Virginia as an example, where we shed about 60 million tons of production, the majority of that loss being in southern West Virginia because of those policy decisions. And now we find ourselves today, and those of us that operate in the coal world and the energy world every day, as we do, Chris, we told policymakers, we tried, and the folks that live and work in West Virginia and depend on this for their livelihood tried to tell lawmakers for years that you're pushing it too hard. You're going to retire too many coal plants, you're going to cause too much coal production to come offline, and when you really need it, it's not going to be there. And that has certainly happened. It's happening as we sit here today. Power prices across this country are abnormally elevated. Even though it is 30 degrees and the winter weather has arrived, it's not really that cold yet. And yet power prices are probably 30 to 50% higher than what they should be if there was an adequate supply of coal or if there was an adequate supply of natural gas.
I understand, and I've read recently where some of the federal agencies that have jurisdiction and responsibilities with national energy policy, NERC and FERC, and plus our regional grid operators, the PJM officials and MISO officials, it's sort of north central Midwest. It's my understanding that they have all issued warnings, and they have all talked with their counterparts in EPA and EPA's hierarchy that we do have a crisis on our hands. It's not a potential crisis, but we're rushing to remove these coal plants from around the country, not necessarily here in West Virginia, but we're rushing to remove and decommission these coal plants, and there's nothing that's up and running that's going to provide provide the electricity for that void.
That's exactly right. Because the most recently, I think, was last week when the North American Electric Reliability Council, NERC as we refer to it, issued yet another warning that we're going into another winter season that everybody predicts is going to be worse in terms of fuel supply than one that we've seen in this country probably since the 70s.
Here's what they see. They see and have their fingers on the pulse here. They were aware and were working when we had the polar vortex several years ago, and then the bomb cyclone period, where you have these extended periods of adverse weather, freezing, extremely cold. And they're aware that when those events happened several years ago, it was the coal fleet that was called upon to sort of save the day, to run in overtime, to run on, steroids to respond and provide heat and electricity. That's called baseload generation. They're also aware that many of those plants that were called upon during that period of time are no longer operating today.
Yes, it's a really frightening proposition. Just to speak of the polar vortex bomb cyclone period, because there was a very specific snapshot, if you will, that NERC did of a particular grid that has Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, parts of Alabama, kind of the southeast. It's called BACAS is how it's referred to. But they did a snapshot of that and compared it to the polar vortex, and there were 8 coal plants that are relatively high capacity, let's say over 1,000 megawatts of generating capacity, multiple units. And those 8 coal plants were brought online and ran for the duration of that event and even after, to give the remainder of the system a chance to catch its breath. Those 8 plants are gone. And when you take that into consideration, those 8 plants are now gone. So let's extrapolate that out to PJM and MISO and the rest of the grid. Similar situations have happened with the coal plants in those footprints as well. But now we layer onto it an additional concern is, let's say that you have adequate coal capacity, which we might just have enough in PJM. But the second question becomes is, do you have enough coal supply? And again, the coal stockpile levels across the country remain at remarkably low levels. And extreme winter weather impacts everything, not just electricity consumption, but transportation. You know, locks and dams freeze, railroads have problems with switches and locomotive reliability and things like that.
And that's why you try to maintain a 45, 60-day supply of coal on the ground. 30 is probably the bare minimum.
Yeah.
You know, whereas if you're operating a plant and it's operating on gas, you know, that's real-time delivery.
Yeah, it has to come out of the nozzle.
You can't afford any disruption or delay there. That is real-time delivery.
Yeah, it's
and
burned
I think
as
we
it comes
saw
out.
in one of the, I think we saw internationally where a major pipeline was, you know, they thought maybe that there was some terrorism involved where it had a you know, ruptured valve or section of pipeline and you know, lost major supply of gas to you know, critical need areas.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, I think the other thing, you know, just to go back to the NERC report, and there's a perception around the country that, you know, if you look at, let's call it the build out of solar and wind, and, you know, it's easy to look at those pure numbers and assume that there's, you know, let's say 100,000 megawatts of wind and solar that's going to come online that'll more than offset, say, the loss of coal generation or the loss of nuclear, which is also one of the issues that's confronting us. Is, you know, nuclear plants are coming offline for some unknown reason. But what that doesn't account for is the reliability factor, or what's called credited generation. So you've got nameplate, you know, you've got a 10 megawatt solar panel, that's its nameplate capacity. But in terms of the energy it can produce for the grid, it's essentially only going to produce about 4 megawatts. And that's only during the daylight hours because it's the variable nature, the clouds, whatever.
So it's a misnomer to say 1 megawatt of wind equals 1 megawatt of coal.
Exactly.
Fire generation.
Yeah. And you know, there's a similar D rate, if you will, for wind power between you know, a 10 megawatt windmill versus what it can actually supply to the grid.
You know, all this gets a little complicated, particularly for our viewers. We're throwing acronyms out, PJM and megawatts, and you know, we're probably a little better off here in West Virginia. You know, I don't want to cause anybody alarm out there, but you know, we just heard yesterday where there's a major coal plant that has announced its potential closure up in Pleasants County. And that's a plan of just extraordinary potential and benefit to the state of West Virginia in terms of all the jobs up there in Pleasants County and all the coal supply jobs that lead into that. And then as you and I talked, we were privy to a you know, a list of all the contractors and all those employment numbers that work around that plant.
Yeah, it's really remarkable because you know, you and I have talked before. Is, you know, people think of these things as power plants, which they are, but when in terms of employment levels and downstream economic value throughout the community, they're no different than a factory that makes automobiles or makes steel.
They manufacture electricity.
They just happen to manufacture megawatts.
It's a major manufacturing facility.
Hundreds of
state of the art,
hundreds of
fully
people.
compliant. Some very you know, advanced technologies at play there.
Hundreds of
we
people
see a
go
big
through the
gray
gate.
building, but
Yeah, hundreds of people go through that gate every day to make what is right now, even as we sit here today with all the advances in, you know, natural gas drilling, wind and solar, it is still the cheapest way to make megawatts is to manufacture them from coal. And
you know, I was talking before Rotary, and it just caused me to reflect on that. You know, when you bear mining down today, you know, the essence of mining is to, you know, really generate electricity and to manufacture steel for infrastructure build out. That's a whole other dimension. That's half of what we do here in West Virginia with our metallurgical coal portfolio. But when you think about what miners do, and I've heard you refer to these as freedom miners because it is what they do each and every day that provides the rest of us with all the freedoms and liberties and all. You know, coal and coal mining and coal miners have been responsible for us being victorious in a couple world wars. They've driven the information age, the industrial age, and you know, here we are today within somewhere in the midst of a major energy era. And you know, again, it's mining that's generating the electricity that provides the household and industrial power, you know, to keep America as strong as it is. I mean, it's just a tremendous, I refer to it as the most honorable profession you'll find anywhere in the world. And it's just so unfortunate, you know, that these men and women within our mining family wake up every day to, you know, some negative reading, you know, some liberal fabric somewhere wanting to take away their, and in this case, most recently, a president that wants to, you know, remove their source of employment. I mean, it is really unfortunate and un-American.
It is, Chris, and the thing that really disappoints me, as you and I have talked before, is, you know, in today there is a global energy crisis that's been going on now for about a year and a half, and it's likely just going to get worse. It's going to continue, probably, most experts think, through the remainder of 2023 into the year after that, just depending on what happens politically. So what we should be waking up to every day, and I'm reading in the newspaper or hearing on the television shows, is how much in demand West Virginia coal is and how critical it's going to be, not only for this country, but for our allies around the world. You know, we've got the highest quality coal in the world. It burns the hottest. It makes energy, it makes electricity the cheapest on a per ton basis. It's the most valuable anywhere on the planet, challenged only maybe by Australia in terms of its metallurgical portfolio. But again, to watch the media and to hear national politicians, it's almost like nobody wants it. That's not the case. You know, we have a slide that's going to pop up here in just a second that shows coal prices. And coal prices are the highest they've ever been, ever, in the history of burning black rocks in this country. You know, the Illinois Basin coal, which is, you know, as you know, is a little lesser quality, burns a little lower, has a little higher air quality constituent problem with it. It is basically, on a per ton basis, the equivalent of high quality Northern Appalachian, Central Appalachian coal. And a really remarkable thing that happened for the first time again, probably in my career, maybe ever, as we sit here today, thermal coal burned to make electricity is worth more than metallurgical coal. That's never happened.
Heard someone say yesterday that you know, that there will be no coal in stockings for bad children this Christmas.
Heck no, it's worth too much.
It's worth too much. It'll be a Christmas gift for those explanatory, or not explanatory, but those kids that do well.
Yeah, if any of the parents watching the show are hoarding coal to put in their kids' stockpiles, please let us know so we can come and get it to a coal plant or a steel mill.
To your last point about the price of coal, and I think most people close to the industry know two things I want to say to that. You know, one, you know, because of the higher price of coal right now and the amount that we're generating or producing here within the state, it's really putting the state in a real good place.
It is.
I mean, there's over $1 billion of surplus money. In fact, our legislature and governor are currently looking at different ways and initiatives to return some of that money back to the general public, because and that's all because of the price of coal and the, you know, set rate, the tax rate being on the every ton of coal.
Yeah.
It's a severance tax program. That money's returned back throughout all 55 counties. I mean, that's really a neat program when you think about it. Kudos to those legislators and those in public office at the time years ago when that was created, because some of that money is returned back throughout all 55 counties. And so when you think about it, every county, every person in this state benefit directly from that coal severance money being returned to those counties. The second thing I want to point out is, you know, even with the high price of the base fuel, it's still the best deal in town. Is that not accurate?
It is.
It's still a lot cheaper to generate electricity with coal than wind, gas. Go into some of that detail, if you will.
I mean, even now where coal prices, spot coal prices are bumping, and one thing we probably ought to clarify for the audience is, you know, the reason why those prices are so high on the chart that we showed is that there's not enough coal. So it's somewhat of
And it's in world demand.
it's in world demand, but you know, 80% of the coal that's transacted is sold under long-term contract. So the fact that because of that, the 80% locked in on long-term contract, the state isn't taking an advantage of those high prices like it should be able to, because we can't crank out the extra tons because of all the difficulties that we talked about. Now, some of the coal that we're mining is being sold at those high spot prices, but not very much. But enough of it's being sold to give the state those high returns like you were talking about. And you know, Chris, there's a graph on the chart now that just uses a particular example from one of our local utilities and shows the price per megawatt hour based on different fuels. And even we adjusted this chart last couple of months based on some filings from that company with our Public Service Commission just to check our data, because coal prices have gone up so much. But even under that analysis, coal is still, as you can see from that, remarkably cheaper than any of those other power sources.
Energy prices has gone up everywhere. And I'm amused that, you know, when certain anti-coal forces want to point to the high price of coal and the high price of their electric bill, you know, they'll draw back to what we were paying for electricity 20 years ago.
Sure.
And they'll say, you know, over the past 20 years, electric prices, household utility prices have doubled or tripled. Well, prices have just gone up exponentially everywhere, particularly energy prices. Look at what we're paying for gas.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're working on now at the association is trying to demonstrate, you know, our viewers are going to see increases in their electric bills, no matter which part, whether they're in the Appalachian Power or First Energy system. But what we need to be able to demonstrate to folks, both at home and in the State House and across the country, is if you took the coal plants out of that mix, how much higher would it be? And I think it would be remarkable. You know, instead of going from, let's say, a 20% increase, it would be something to the order of 400%. Because again, natural gas, as you mentioned, Chris, is sold at the nozzle where it goes into the boiler. That's real-time
And that's
delivery.
our primary heating fuel here in West Virginia.
Yes.
That is what's driving the home utility bills up, is their natural gas bills.
Yeah.
You know, those have doubled, tripled.
And natural gas, you know, we were talking about 80% of the coal is sold under long-term contract, which is a year or more, where you're able to stabilize prices. Natural gas is exactly the inverse. 80% of it is sold at the nozzle as it's blown into the power plant. So it's real-time market prices. So when you see natural gas prices of $14 an MCF, that's what's being paid for that to make electricity too. So that's the majority of the reason why power prices have spiked around the country. It's entirely after 2015. Natural gas is 40% and higher of the fuel mix to make electricity nationally. Here in West Virginia, luckily, we're still about 90% coal-fired. And compared to everybody else's electric bills, ours are going to look pretty minuscule when the real depths of the winter get here, like they did earlier this year during what we call the high summer burn, when the coal stockpiles and the natural gas levels were so low. Still, we did okay here in West Virginia.
In fact, coal supplies are so low in some of our foreign countries. Some foreign countries are firing back up coal plants and also seeking supplies, you know, new supplies outside of their country's boundaries.
They are. So you're seeing a remarkable, again, the strings of demand are so strong that, you know, Europe, for example, Europe would normally take West Virginia coal. We've got an established export infrastructure, if you will, between the mines, the railroads, and the ports to get our coal to Europe very efficiently. But there were some transportation difficulties earlier this year. There was an outage at a major coal export terminal in Maryland where a lot of our northern West Virginia coal went.
Right.
So Europe was confronted with not only having to replace 40 million tons of Russian coal, but losing at least half, if not more, of its traditional American supplier in terms of West Virginia. So they did really creative is the only term I can think of for it, things to make sure they had enough fuel, like taking lower quality coal from Indonesia, which is just unheard of. You know, that stuff's just, it's almost lignite in terms of BTU value. So you're moving massive tonnage and getting half or less of the energy equivalent that you would from West Virginia coal. And again, it's just remarkable. There's not enough solid fuel, i.e. coal, to make the steel that the world needs or to make the electricity that it needs right now. But again, back to your point, Chris, if you hear world leaders or, you know, even closer to home, it hurts us even deeper. You hear our national leaders talk, do you think they have this problem solved and we can turn off these coal plants and we'll find something else here to do here in West Virginia?
As we've talked about, there's a natural transition underway, you know, moving beyond some of the heavy reliance on fossil energy. But here in West Virginia, it's it's probably upwards of 95% of the fuel that we use, and to try to force the country away from fossil energy is where that rub or conflict occurs. I mean, some things you just can't force, or you're going to have unintended consequences. Take the electric cars, for instance. If everybody switches to an electric car tomorrow, how do you charge them? How do you keep them charged and enjoy your, all the things that we enjoy every day that's generated by electricity?
Yeah, Chris, I think in retrospect, when folks look back, states that didn't rush to retire their coal plants and instead invested in their future, like we did here in West Virginia, we're going to realize what a major asset that those plants turned out to be.
Well, and we have had those discussions with people from other states. I mean, we stand ready as a state to export higher volumes of electricity, of base load electricity to our surrounding states here at border West Virginia.
Mm-hmm. And I think those states are counting on, in the regional grid operator, grid operators are counting on the coal plants in West Virginia, some of the ones in southern Pennsylvania, some of the ones in southern Ohio, to really step it up and meet the peak demand this year as winter sets in. And I hope we've got enough coal in transit and at the plants so that can happen.
Jason, these are exciting times for the industry. A lot of challenges out there. Challenges to try to slow things down just a little bit and reinvest in our state industrial workers and these plants to keep them running as long as possible. But we're going to persevere. We're going to get through these times, and coal stands to be a part of West Virginia's future for decades to come, from both a thermal coal and keeping our plants providing the electricity for our industrial base and homes, and all the computerization, and the metallurgical coal will continue to be the base fuel used for our infrastructure build out across this country. So we can't thank you enough for coming by. I think this has been a great conversation. We'll continue this in the very near future. And thank you for taking time to join us today at the coal scene.